Well, I welcome all of you, dear students, once again for the RL 221 course, The Popes of Rome, History of the Catholic Church. This particular lecture session corresponds to your worksheet 8.1 and 8.2. For RL 225, Mystics, Saints, and Sinners, Studies in Medieval Catholic Culture, this lecture session corresponds to your worksheet 8. With that, we are now in the medieval period, full blown, and we left off last time, at least RL 221, with the creation of the university in the medieval period as the institution par excellence to reboot civilization by preparing the elites of tomorrow. How else might we attempt to reboot human civilization? Going back to the very beginning of both courses, the systems, the three systems for how human societies come together. Once again, the first being the oikonomia, the system, the economy, because it's all about this. And that leads us to point number 1 on the worksheet regarding the medieval period, the Middle Ages, the buying and selling of indulgences. The buying and selling of indulgences. This would be, believe it or not, especially as we go through this, or at least one of the main factors of the economy throughout medieval Christian Europe's, Christendom's history, which would be extremely lucrative for many people. It would also wind up being one of the primary reasons for the eventual so-called Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the 1500s, which we'll come to again later in another lecture session. So the buying and selling of indulgences. What is this all about? Well, first of all, what is an indulgence? Again, it has nothing to do with Christian theology or the Roman Catholic Church, for that matter. It comes from the Latin term indulgentia, a mechanism within Roman law, which we would say loosely translated into English is a pardon for a crimen, a crime. This is ancient Rome, nothing to do with Christianity. Eventually, already by the 3rd century, with our friends we discussed much earlier in the course for RL 221 at least, Tertullian and Cyprian, a crimen would wind up becoming attached to the concept of peccatum, a sin. A sin. Crimen, crime, peccatum, sin. And in the first 5 centuries, at least, of the history of Christianity in the Roman Catholic Church, there never was such a thing as the frequent reception practice of the sacrament of reconciliation, penance, confession. The sacrament indeed did exist, but you did not do it regularly. In other words, you didn't go once a week or once a month to tell some weirdo in a wooden box that you talked smack about your neighbor, you gossiped. No. The sacrament of penance, reconciliation, confession was reserved to only those who had committed under Roman law a grave crimen, a grave crime, which generally were three: some form of homicidium, homicide, murder; adulterium, adultery, an umbrella term for a number of violations of sexual mores, customs under Roman law, and specifically, or more specifically for the Christians, but also under Roman law regarding what we've already discussed in terms of the role of religion, religio, in ancient Rome: apostasy, rejection of the Roman gods, or in the case of Christianity, rejection of Jesus Christ. It was only in the case that it was proven one was guilty of having committed one of these three different crimes, and for Christians subsequently sins, that one would need to go to the sacrament, use the sacrament of penance, reconciliation, confession, which in the first, again, 5 centuries of Christianity meant you had to go to the bishop. So not just going to a priest, but going to the bishop, inform the bishop, admit to the bishop, confess to the bishop that you had done this, who would then present you publicly before the community at large, the Christian community at large, following which you would be allowed admittance into what was called the Order of Penitents. Please, on the worksheets, it's already written there, spell these terms correctly. A penitent is one who is in the order of penitents in order to do penance. Okay. And in these first 5 centuries, if you were enrolled in the order of penitents, it was a very long, drawn out, protracted, form of what most Roman Catholics today think of the sacrament of reconciliation, penance, confession. It wasn't just in and out of the box with 3 Hail Marys and you're done. No, if you were in the order of penitence, it lasted anywhere between 1 to 3 years on average, depending on the severity of the crime or the sin, the social context of the community, whatever repercussions there may be because of that. And it was a discretion, that is the sententia, the sentence, the judgment, for how long and what you would have to do once you're in the order of penitence, depended on the discretion of the Christian bishop. When Pope Gregory the Great, again around the year 600, so back kind of for a moment to the very early medieval period, really the Dark Ages, when Pope Gregory the Great begins this process of sending missionary monks throughout the former Western Roman Empire in order to enlighten non-Christian barbarians, usually, of the truth, the reality of Jesus Christ, and the oneness of the worldwide political assembly of Christ, the Catholic Church. The monks would go out, usually in groups of 12, that's convenient, and at the very best, they might have one actually ordained priest among them. And it's only an ordained priest in the place as a vicar of the bishop who can actually hear a so-called confession, perform the sacrament of penance, reconciliation, confession. And as you might imagine, the number of priests were much less and reduced versus the number of monks that were on these expeditionary, missionary movements. And so what happens, and actually specifically in the British Isles and even Ireland, is that monks would wind up converting peoples from worshiping their tree fairies or stepping out of their fairy rings, right, and becoming followers of this new religion, Christianity. And almost shortly thereafter it occurred, very quickly to the monks that were doing this, that they had a bit of a problem on their hands. For example, just a fictional anecdote. Imagine one day Friar Tuck, or I guess Tuco, because he's coming from Italy. But anyway, Friar Tuck's walking up a dirt path, a road somewhere in the Emerald Isle, right, Ireland, and he happens to cross paths with one of his recent converts to Christianity, a guy named Seamus. And they, as the Irish tend to do, they immediately banter back and forth, niceties, they exchange pleasantries. How's the day going? How's your week been? How's your month been? And then just Seamus, because he's a rather ingenuous soul, just happens to blurt out, yeah, well, I killed my neighbor last week because I found out that he was stealing some of my sheep. And Friar Tuck says, what? Well, yeah, I had to smash a boulder over his head. He was stealing my sheep. What am I supposed to do? Friar Tuck says, you killed him? You're damn right I did. Friar Tuck says, well, we have a problem. Because under Roman law, where I'm coming from, even though the Western Roman Empire has collapsed, doesn't matter, that's a crime. And moreover, it's also a grave sin as far as the Christians are concerned and this new community to which you just joined. We have a problem. You're technically excommunio, out of communication, out of communion. You're excommunicated. Do your neighbors know about this? Well, some do, certainly. They had to bury the lad. So word's gotten out about this. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? I'm sure we'll cross paths again in about another week. So let me talk to my confreres, my other friars, and I'll get back to you. So the friars get together, and Friar Tuck shares the story, and suddenly it appears that a lot of the other friars have had similar experiences, because apparently in Ireland in the 6th, 7th centuries, smashing boulders on your neighbor's heads for stealing your sheep was kind of a thing. And they said, what are we going to do? Because as we know, apart from the fact we don't even have a priest in our midst, or let's say we do have a priest, we certainly don't have a bishop. And the bishop is the only one with the authority and power to perform the sacrament of penance, reconciliation, confession, to allow one into the order of penitence. What are we going to do? Because this is apparently a much more widespread phenomenon than we initially thought here. Can we allow them into the order of penitence? Well, I guess provisionally. It's not actually licit, legal, in terms of church canon, church law, regulation. But we got to do something, because otherwise things are going to get rather confused and messed up, and we might start losing people. They might start going back to worshiping their tree fairies and dancing around in their fairy rings among different grassy knolls in Ireland. So these missionary monk friars remembered one of their courses in Roman law they took back in Rome before being sent on this mission to bring these different peoples into the Christian fold. They said, I remember, isn't there a loophole in Roman law regarding such crimes known as an indulgentia, a pardon? Moreover, such a pardon can either be partial or plenary, meaning a full pardon. You're just pardoned, kind of like a governor commutes, God forbid, someone who's on death row commutes the sentence. They're pardoned fully. Or it can be partial. What do I mean by partial? That is to say that if one would find oneself in the order of penitence, which we said can last anywhere between a year to 3 years, during which time you are supposed to visibly show the community you're doing this. So you maybe have to walk around in a potato sack, a burlap sack, sackcloth and ashes kind of thing. You have to visibly demonstrate that you are praying. Certainly almsgiving. You're giving money to the community. That's very convenient. So you're demonstrating these acts of penance as one who is in the order of penitents, again, which can last between a year and 3 years. And so these monks come up, devise a plan to say, well, we can tentatively enter these people into the order of penitence, and whenever the bishop will next make his rounds, it could be a year from now, it could be 5 years from now, we don't know, then the bishop will kind of decide how to manage and handle and formalize the process and deal with this. Maybe there's a way we can also take time off of one having to be in the order of penitence. That is, maybe we can also grant a partial indulgence. How are we going to do that? A few weeks go by. Back to Friar Tuck on the road. Re-encounters Seamus, the slayer of sheep thieves. And Friar Tuck says, well, Seamus, good to see you. Listen, we got together, my brothers and I, and we figured out a plan about how to fix, at least temporarily, this situation. And Seamus, of course, says, well, I'm all ears. Friar Tuck says, well, you're de facto in the order of penitence, and you're kind of in a state of limbo, which we're not going to get into what limbo is, but that is, you're in a weird gray area. Technically, you are excommunio. You're out of communication, out of communion. You're excommunicated from the community. In other words, you cannot participate in the Eucharist, the Mass, and if people find out about this, they may even engage in such practices as shunning. They may not engage with you in commerce. They may not buy your wool from your recently shorn sheep. Of course, Seamus is looking rather pallid by this point and wondering, what in the world did I get myself into with these Christians and this church thing? And Friar Tuck realizes, he sees this kind of waving over Seamus, and Friar Tuck says, no, but we found a way. Here's what we can do. You will just tell what you've done to our priest. Fortunately, our local nearby community of Benedictine monks has a priest in our midst. So you'll be able to tell the priest, confess to the priest what you've done, and the priest will tentatively, as a vicar, one that stands in the place of the bishop, allow you into the order of penitence. When the bishop eventually comes around, then the bishop will decide what to do. You'll have to do, some penance. It needs to be visible to the rest of the community. So again, wearing, walk around a potato sack. We're in Ireland. You'll have to practice almsgiving. Give some money to the church here, the community. Make sure you look like you're praying every now and then. That sort of thing. And Seamus says, well, okay, that's a bitch, but I can do that. How long is this going to take? And Friar Tuck says, well, I don't know. We don't know. It could be a few years. A few years? A few years? Friar Tuck says, well, we think we found a way maybe to even further take time off of the time you have to spend in the order of penitence. And again, the bishop's going to have to make a final decision on this whenever he comes around. But in the meantime, to make sure you're back in action, you're back to being a contributing member of the community, especially economically, we think we've devised a way. That is, we cannot grant you at this point full pardon for what you've done. That is a plenary indulgence. But we think we can shave time off by granting you a partial indulgence. And it's actually rather simple. All you have to do is recite a certain number of prayers, do a certain number of things, and we can already kind of shave off, just as long as you agree to this, you do it, we'll already knock off a year, 18 months, hell, maybe even 2 years. Now, Seamus is scratching his head thinking, you gotta be kidding me. I like the idea of Jesus and all that, but I think I was better off at this point with my leprechauns. And Friar Tuck says, no, well, there's an incentive behind this. Because we noticed that you, Seamus, and a lot of your friends, you on your off time, you seem to enjoy whittling, carving pieces of wood into little objects, figurines, statues, again, little, fairy or a leprechaun or whatever. And we had the idea that maybe you could, instead of whittling these pieces of wood into leprechauns and fairies, maybe you could make statues of Jesus or Mary or one of the saints. And you could sell them. And Seamus says, well, I don't know, because I don't think, even though we're all Christian now, most of the people I know, they like their leprechauns, their little wooden leprechauns. And Friar Tuck says, well, I don't think so at this point, because we've found out that, Seamus, there's a lot of people in your situation, and they're going to be willing to Trust me, they are going to buy. If you start whittling statues of Mary instead of some figure from a lame Irish dancing troupe, they're going to buy them because they're in the same situation. Seamus says, obviously, why are they going to buy them? And Friar Tuck says, well, because those prayers we told you had to recite, those things you have to do, they'll be attached to the little figurine you're whittling out of wood of Mary or Jesus or a saint. And in doing that, you take time for yourself off of the time you have to spend in the order of penitence, as well as the person who's purchasing this from you. So you not only, it's a win-win situation for you. You not only get to take time for yourself off of and out of the order of penitence, but you'll be making money on the deal as well, even though you're going to have to give us a kickback. We'll make it 20%. And of course, Seamus, not the brightest bulb in the pack, but a man of common sense, says, so does that mean I'm somehow buying my way out of the order of penitence? Does that mean I'm somehow purchasing forgiveness from Jesus? Does that mean I'm somehow buying or purchasing God's divine grace and mercy, which, if I recall, Friar Tuck, when you got me wrapped into this whole thing, you told me was free. And Friar Tuck says, of course, Seamus, you're absolutely correct. That's absurd. You cannot buy God's divine mercy, grace, forgiveness. That's not what you're doing, and that's not what people who will be shopping from you will be doing. No. They are simply purchasing the object to which are attached these other parameters. Hence the introduction of the buying and selling of indulgences. I hope that makes sense. That's clear enough. Moreover, you might be wondering, if you've already caught on and figured this out, you might be thinking, this, apart from sounding like a Ponzi scheme, how in the world could people buy into this? Pardon the pun. How could they believe this? How could they go along with this? Well, remember, we're talking about the 6th, 7th centuries here. People who are not nearly as enlightened as people are today. And so the idea of superstition, perhaps, the fear of punishment, certainly eternal punishment, the hope of having constant divine favor for you. It was believe it or not, it was a very, very significant motivating factor in people going along with this, especially, again, think always pragmatically, practically, cynically, not idealistically, much less theologically or religiously. There's money involved, and consequently, excuse me, believe it or not, this practice, the buying and selling indulgences, spread like wildfire throughout the Roman Empire, or I should say the former Western Roman Empire, what is now medieval Christendom. So much so, so that's regarding specifically, Mamma mia, excuse me, the buying and selling of indulgences, how it was introduced, how it would wind up being proliferated. It became a mainstay of economies throughout Europe. We started out with Seamus somewhere on a grassy knoll in Cork County, Ireland, whittling little figurines of Mary away and selling them, to which the indulgence is attached. In a very short amount of time, we jump from that to now in other parts of medieval Europe, painting images of Jesus, different saints, etc. Ramp that up. What if a nobleman, what if a king has had to execute a rival? They're excommunicated, right? Nope. Because now you can get an indulgence. But it needs to be, since you're more prominent, you're a prominent figure, you're a king, or duke, whatever, prince, baron. Maybe it needs to, your time in the order of penitence will be a little longer, and therefore there's a bigger bond on your head, a larger amount of bail money, if you will. How are you going to spend that? Well, why don't you build a church? Small church, a chapel, maybe a big church, and you'll get your at least partial, maybe you'll get a full indulgence at this point, which is what eventually happens as the medieval period goes on. And that leads us to looking at the worksheet. Number 1.b, the Crusades. The Crusades. Anyone who participated in a crusade was granted a plenary indulgence for any and all crimes and sins that they had committed in the past. Think about that. So it's not just a matter of fearing that I'm going to go to hell. You're pardoned by secular